time series data are data for a single entity, person, firm, country, collected at multiple time periods. Our data set on the growth rate of GDP and the term spread in the United States is an example of a time series dataset. The dataset contains observations on two variables, the growth rate of gross domestic product and the term spread, for a single entity, the United States, for 232 time periods. Each time period in this dataset is a quarter of a year. The first quarter is January, February, and March, and the second quarter is April, May, June, and so forth. The observations in this dataset begin in the first quarter of 1960, which is denoted 1960 Q1, capital Q1, and end in the fourth quarter of 2017, capital Q4. The number of observations, that is time periods, in a time series data set is denoted capital T because there are 232 quarters from 1960, capital Q1, to 2017, capital Q4. This data set contains capital T equals 232 observations. Some observations in this data set are listed in table 1.2. The data in each row correspond to a different time period, year and quarter. In the first quarter of 1960, for example, GDP grew 8.8% at an annual rate. In other words, if gross domestic product had continued growing for 4 quarters at its rate during the first quarter of 1960, the level of gross domestic product would have increased by 8.8%. In the first quarter of 1960, the long-term interest rate was 4.5% and the short-term interest rate was 3.9%. So the difference, the term spread, was 0.6 percentage points. By tracking a single entity over time series data can be used to study the evolution of variables over time and to forecast future values of those variables. Panel data. Panel data, also called longitudinal data, are data for multiple entities in which each entity is observed at 2 or more time periods. Our data on cigarette consumption and prices are an example of a panel data set, and selected variables and observations in that data set are listed in table 1.3. The number of entities in a panel data set is denoted by N, and the number of time periods is denoted by capital T. In the cigarette data set, we have observations on N equals 48 continental U.S. states, entities for capital T equals 11 years, time periods from 1985 to 1995. Thus, there is a total of N times capital T equals 48 times 11 equals 528 observations. See table 1.3, selected observations on cigarette sales, prices, and taxes by state and year for U.S. states 1985 to 1995. You have the observation state, the year, the cigarette sales, average price per pack, and total taxes. Be sure to check on table 1.2, selected observations on the growth rate of GDP and the term spread in the United States, quarterly data, in the previous section. Returning to the text.